Hello everybody and welcome to podcast with Theo and Andy, and today we're going to talk about childhood trauma and how it actually impacts our lives, and also how can it impact your children's lives and your children's lives. So morning Theo, do you want to get started on this one?
Good morning and welcome everyone after a break in the Reason for Now podcasts. I thought I'd talk about this today because I went to a lecture by the headmaster of my son's school, and the school is a Catholic school, and he said one of the things that Catholic schools do is they view all children as divine, and that is exactly how the teachers view your child. And he said that must be a very good feeling for parents, because obviously parents love their kids more than anything else, and they're giving them to an institution that regards their kids as divine. And he then started talking about the expectations you have of children. And he talked about one of the mistakes that he made, because there was a little boy who tends to misbehave quite a lot and ends up in his office. And one day he was giving a lecture on some aspect of the Bible. And he was mainly focusing on the slightly more senior group at the back, because they seem to have the most experience and understanding of it. And he said at one point, the little boy put his hand up, and he said, I must admit, I was slightly impatient. I said, yes, what do you want? Because I thought he was asking to go to the toilet. But instead, he came up with an incredibly deep, interesting interpretation followed by a question. And he said, you can bet your life that if one of the girls at the back in the senior year had asked me that question, I'd have answered totally differently. My expectation was different. So I had a chat with the headmaster myself, and I said, well, people behave according to your expectation. In fact, you behave according to your expectation of yourself, and what that is self-esteem. Self-esteem is the degree of positivity that you hold about yourself, and the degree of positivity of success in whatever endeavor you take part in. So, for instance, if you have a low expectation of yourself, no matter how clever you are, no matter how good your idea is, you're less likely to actually act. And if you do act, you're not going to be very positive about it. Whereas high self-esteem people, they tend to act on a lot more of their ideas, and when they act, they are more positive. They expect to do well. Okay.
Because the Asian community are very much expectant of their children to be very successful in school, particularly.
Yeah, but that's different. Sorry to break it, but that's different. That's pressure. Okay, there's a big difference, because of course what happens is they're on top of them, and then praise is contingent on success. So the kids get a lot of criticism as well.
Yeah, but all this sort of does impact a child's behaviour, does it not? I mean, the thing is, because there's a level of conditioning to behave in a certain way. Because I think, okay, let's say, let's go to the point of birth, really, if you want to. Let's go that far.
Yes, we will. But one final thing I said to the headmaster, which he said he found really, really interesting, and I said, look, talking about expectation, because this is a Catholic school, I said, what about prayer? And I said to him, one of my patients was a very devout Muslim who was also a scientist, and he confided in me. He said, "Look, I have great difficulty sometimes reconciling my religion with my science." And I said to him, "Well, maybe you're asking the wrong questions. Well, give me an example." He said, "Well, prayer. How does prayer work, for instance? Because Muslims pray 5 times a day." Yeah. So I said to him, "Well, do you pray for good things or bad things?" And he said, "Good things." I said, well, there you are. So you are generating a positive expectation and repeating good things. So you're doing self-affirmations and developing an expectation that things will go your way. Perhaps that's how prayer works. And the headmaster found that really, really interesting. So tell me about what you were saying about going back to birth.
The thing is, from the moment a child is born, there'll be some sort of unconscious thoughts that they'll actually develop, or unconscious behaviours that they'll actually develop that they're not even aware of. The amount of love you get from a parent, even from the point of birth. Or do you feel or do you feel that, when the baby's born and they're not given as much attention, how does their behaviour then translate further on in life? And the thing is, we're not even actually aware of these behaviours until much, much, much later on, because we're not always self-aware of what we can look at the symptoms, but we don't actually know the real problem that has actually caused it. So you've got someone, let's say they're born, they've got an alcoholic father, they've got a promiscuous mother for whatever, and then that's all they know until the age of 5. And then at 5, the school puts them into the system. The government puts them into the school system, by law. They've got to go to nursery, they go to school, and then from the school they develop their relationships. Now, kids who arrive at a school who have probably multiple brothers and sisters will probably have a very different behaviour to someone who's actually been an only child who spent the first 5 years of their life with their mother. All right, so the social skills are going to be very different. And by the time you've actually got into that school classroom, and probably more importantly the playground, you actually start having, it becomes the Serengeti in some ways, and you actually start to actually feel out where you actually fit in. And the thing is, some people are more abusive mentally, some people are physical. So the thing is, you learn to maneuver your way around those sort of things. And by the time by the time you get to adulthood, the impact that school experience has had on you will actually have a huge impact on your self-esteem later on in life. So if you get slightly broken in the beginning, basically you become lame. Mentally lame, if you want to put it in that way, by the time you actually get older. And because you talked about epigenetics at one point with me, and people get more depressed and things like this, and then what happens is that is then transferred in the DNA or the epigenetic sort of how do you put it? The change is then transferred to your children. Because it's to do with grey matter as well, isn't it, in the brain, apparently, in terms of depression and...
Well, yes. So you're bringing out quite a few different things there. So what you mentioned is fractures to self-esteem, and then you talked about the mechanism or the biological mechanism by which that may occur. And you're absolutely correct. So self-esteem, first of all, what is the origin of self-esteem? Where does it come from? The first thing is, it can be genetic. In other words, you get some people with an artificially raised self-esteem. Examples of those are psychopaths and narcissists. And it's interesting because, of course, they actually act on their ideas, which means that a lot of psychopaths and narcissists are very successful. And that's why our population of CEOs, psychopaths are 50 times more representative amongst the population of CEOs than they are in the general population. Now, the thing is, however, that psychopaths act on all of their ideas, not just the good ones, because they don't care about law and rules. So it also means that 50% of prisoners are psychopaths. So what differentiates the average person from a psychopath in terms of self-esteem, so an average person with good self-esteem versus a psychopath, is that the average person with good self-esteem has their moral and cultural and religious boundaries to their behaviour. So in other words, they don't do the stuff that gets them to trouble, or at least they do it less than the psychopath does.
Actually, that's an interesting thing you said, because the thing is, there's a couple of other factors, particularly I want to go when we go back to school. All right, you go to school and you're taught in a very much an auditory fashion. All right, so you'll have children with, let's say, ADHD, hypothetically. They can't sit still in a classroom, and the thing is, people with ADHD, if they do something they enjoy, they are hyper-focused. But if they're not good at a certain particular subject, they lose interest in learning because they're not learning it in the way that they can experience it. Because they could potentially be very kinesthetic learners, which means they have to get their hands on, they have to get their hands dirty. That's how they understand, that's how they learn. But you're putting someone who's a kinesthetic learner against an auditory learner. An auditory learner is always going to do better. because in some ways auditory learners and people who actually follow systems and rules, they tend to conform to the system a lot better, which means they go into the average. The average of the population. So the people with ADHD and other sort of, I wouldn't say mental, because they're not mental disorders. They're mental. Their brains work, whether it's faster, they're more creative.
Neurodivergence, they call it.
There you go. Thank you for the technical word on that.
Now, that's interesting. What you're saying there, because kinesthetic, actually, they part of the reason for that is they require stimulation.
That's right.
So I remember taking my son to an occupational therapist with ADHD, and the therapist said, "We don't have equipment big enough here." And I thought, what are you talking about? And what they meant is equipment big enough to allow him to really get in and get himself stimulated. So, for instance, they'll say, don't give your son plasticine, give your son a hard putty, because that gives them more stimulation. And it's why, for instance, they use weighted blankets or even weighted animals and they put them on there. But you're right, because if they are at a disadvantage in the current setting, then their self-esteem goes down. And they also don't.
And particularly if you test them, and the thing is, they are taking the mark that they get in that classroom, and as you do, because when they actually calculate who gets what, people start measuring each other against other people. So you start comparing yourself to others, and you don't compare yourself to be. And if you conform, and you're forced to conform, you there will lose your self-esteem. And the thing is, all their talents and their abilities and some people call them superpowers, I suppose, within themselves, they get subdued, they get hidden, they get pushed down. We don't want disruptive kids in a classroom. We want conformists, because conformists go and become the workers. So those type of people are the outliers of this world.
Well, that's right, and that's
or potential outliers.
They are the potential
people with
outliers.
Dyslexia as well, or as another. So it's not just ADHD, dyslexia, even probably dyspraxia to a degree.
So focusing on one thing at a time. So the ADHD people, you're right. The in the current system, unless reasonable adjustments, as the law calls it, are made, they are at a significant disadvantage. And the irony is that ADHD people are usually very clever, and furthermore, because they're thinking all the time, they are very good lateral thinkers and very creative. And one of the requirements for success in life has been shown to be creativity. But the difficulty is success requires creativity and consistency. And of course, ADHD people have great difficulty being consistent.
That's correct, yes.
And indeed, the other group of people who are very creative are the bipolar people, the people who go manic. They also shoot off and can be very creative, but the same difficulty with them is about being consistent. However, because their mood cycles, then they have a stab at being consistent when their mood goes back to what they call euthymia, normal mood, but then of course a lot of them become depressed. But such is the power of their creativity that a lot of bipolar people are willing to weather the storm of going into depression because they are so creative when they're high. So
and that's like the dopamine fix. Because if they're creative when they're enjoying it, it's gonna create a dopamine
because dopamine
spike.
is your pleasure neurotransmitter.
That's right.
Which is why an ADHD person is usually black and white at school. They're either terrible at something if they're not interested, or brilliant at it. And of course, it's why a lot of ADHD people do well at sports, because sports are stimulating.
That's correct.
And a lot of ADHD people, if they come and see me, a lot of them will be marathon runners, swimmers, basketball players, simply, or even dancers, simply because the physicality raised their dopamine.
And also, they tend to just have more energy as a whole, which is why they can't sit still. So, but the thing is, when that energy gets subdued by a system that is, it's actually very confusing for them.
Well, that's the.
It's a very confusing world to live in sometimes.
It is.
I mean, I've got ADHD, and my wife is super organised, and we have our challenges, because the thing is, there's part of me that wants to be able to run really, have a lot more space to run in. And then Emma's, Emma, my wife, is constrained by, I'm thinking about the creativity, and the thing is, she's thinking about the system. And the thing is, I'm not even at the system stage. So when she explains something to me, all I want is steps 1 and 2, and then I'll think about steps 3 and 4 later on.
Yeah, you're just not interested.
I'm not interested in 3. And the thing is, she has to almost feel as though, for her to tell me the whole process, she has to go from A to Z. All right, and the thing is, she goes in order. Whereas people with ADHD probably see A, and then they see D, and then they see G, and then they see Z, and they come back to A again, and connect their dots in very different ways.
So what effect does Ritalin have on you?
It does keep you focused. It does focus you, but it does dim your creativity.
Of course, because it makes you more focused rather than shooting in different directions.
Yeah, because it does make you more focused. So,
do you feel calmer?
No, it depends. The thing is, it's a really hard. Ritalin in this day and age is actually a really hard one, because you also got to look at the diet around you. If you're actually eating out or whatever, and whatever chemicals or whatever stuff they use in food, you don't know how that's going to counter Ritalin. To give you an example, I think when I first put on it, I wasn't told. Well, actually, there was a guy called Andrew Huberman, who's a neuroscientist, who's someone I listened to, and he talked about, for example, if you drink coffee, it raises your dopamine 2.5 times. Sex, 2.5 times. It raises it. If you have nicotine, it raises it to something like that. If you have cocaine, it raises it to that. If you have Ritalin, like an amphetamine like that, it's 10 times. So the thing is, if you actually get the balance to get you to the baseline of what society is, but you have an extra 2 cups of coffee, maybe a nicotine vape, which is quite high in nicotine, and things like this, all of a sudden you're overloading the dopamine that you should really have, and sometimes you can crash a lot harder.
Well, that's right, and that's exactly why it needs to be very carefully explained to people, and actually doctors and psychiatrists are not very good at that.
I'm sorry. It's not that I don't think they're good at it. The thing is, if you actually really had to follow the whole set of instructions, a doctor would be, a GP would be with you for an hour of visit rather than 20 minutes.
Well, that's right. So but then, of course, you need the specialist to tell you. But even then, specialists don't tell you. So, most specialists simply don't. If they do, they don't tell the patient. They don't really understand the concept of the range. In other words, I'll give you an example. One mother was telling me, my son, I think he needs a bigger dose, but the specialist said he wants to keep the bigger dose in reserve for next year. And I said to her, that's nonsense. Your son needs to be on the correct dose, neither too little nor too much, because the dopamine for everyone needs to be in the normal range. If it's too low, you've got ADHD. If it's too high, you're overstimulated. It needs to be in the normal range. And most doctors don't get it. And then, especially if they don't get that, they're not going to tell you, by the way, don't take any other stimulants, because if you do, you're going to push your dopamine above the normal range again. Yeah. So what I tell people is, look, if you're going to take it, be aware of what you want the structure of your day to be. If you want to take your coffee, then by all means, when you're adjusting the dose, what they call titrating, stepping the dose up, make sure you're having your coffee as well, so that nothing changes to your normal routine. And interestingly, did you know being in love is a hyper-dopamine state?
Yeah.
And again, I found
it's why when a relationship breaks down, the crash is that much harder.
But it's interesting how people who are in love either don't need their Ritalin or they need less Ritalin because of their high dopamine. Now, the other problem is, of course, if you're seeking stimulation all the time, the more dopamine you seek, the lower your serotonin, so the more depressed you get. And that brings us on to social media, because social media is all about instant stimulation and instant hits. And what's even worse about it is that people get more of a stimulation by talking about themselves.
Yeah.
And so if you're on scrolling and getting little hits all the time, because the algorithms are designed specifically to keep you online all the time, because they have to sell their advertising. That's how they make their money. what happens is you're getting dopamine little hits constantly, which means you're tiring out your dopamine receptors. They're being overloaded. So they become desensitized. So as soon as you come off that social media, you're effectively dopamine deficient. You effectively become ADHD.
I'll also go one step further. People think it's going on social media. It's not just going on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually from the moment you wake up. I mean, you actually ask yourself, how many people out there, the first thing they do when they wake up is to go for their phone or open up their laptop. And those are little dopamine spikes, subtle ones that we don't actually realise. And actually, so it's not just substances, but in fact, I probably wouldn't even call it even alcohol addiction or anything. I'd actually call them dopamine addictions. They're all dopamine addictions. And the thing is, it's about people finding the balance. But, I mean, going back to the whole school thing, because we've digressed a little bit and gone into that. If you are in school and you're not socialising particularly well with certain people, it could even be one kid in that classroom who's a bit more alpha than you, will have an impact on how other people treat you. That's going to cause self-worth issues. And the thing is, you may even move on in life and get a job and things like that, but that subconscious mind holds on to that.
So what we're talking about,
because that's trauma.
Well, it is, but so it's interesting because, of course, trauma is, it's a nebulous term. We understand post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an extreme stressor resulting in terror and loss of control. But then there is, shall we call it, lesser traumas, and indeed, you might even just call it misunderstanding. In other words, if someone says something to you and you misunderstand it, and you take it to be, in a slightly negative way, then you incorporate that. And of course, the earlier that happens, so below the age of 7, then almost anything someone tells you can have a complete sea change in the way you perceive yourself.
Oh, wasn't there a thing about the Jesuits priest? Give me a child until the age of 7, I'll give you the man.
Well, that is because kids' brains are in the theta wave, which is the same as dream sleep. It means you can access their opinions with logic. In other words, you could change a kid's opinion by telling them something logically. As an adult, you can't do it. You cannot influence emotion with logic, or it's exceptionally hard. What you can do, of course, is influence emotion with different emotion, but you can't do it with logic. And of course, the reason why, for instance, severe traumas can affect your self-esteem is because it causes an intense emotion, which then can rupture your self-esteem.
Let me ask you something else. I don't even know if there's a medical term for it, but it's just a thought that's just come in. Would there be something involved which is called like trauma stacking? Let me explain how. So you've had a trauma. You don't realise the trauma because you don't know what you know what the symptom is, but you don't know what the real problem is. All right, that symptom leads you to make certain decisions and behave in a certain way. If you make a bad decision based on the trauma you've had before, let's go down. Let's say you come out the army. You've been to Afghanistan. You've got some post-traumatic stress disorder. All right, and you joined the army because you wanted to be part of a group because as a child you didn't make many friends and you were an only child. Whatever the reason, it's all stacking. All this trauma stack. So you make a decision. You go to Afghanistan, which is just a further trigger or reinforcement of the trauma you actually had first of all. Then you make a decision like, I'm going to start taking alcohol because it makes me feel better. So now you're thinking, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. And which is a result from the trauma, but also a result from maybe the childhood. So you're stacking the traumas all along.
Well, it's not, I mean, I know.
And then your behaviours are going, so you make decisions that you're making bad decisions because you're making the bad decisions on how you felt or your identity as a child.
You're giving a corporate name to common sense once you understand the real fundamentals of how something works. You're right, because clearly, if your behaviour is influenced by something, you're going to behave differently. and then you're going to have different results from that different behavior. So you're absolutely correct. It can then get worse and worse and worse, which is why I say one of the purposes of therapy is to achieve clarity of mind, and therefore I always say you only have clarity of mind twice in your life: once when you're born, and once after very good therapy that you're motivated to do.
But the thing is, it's interesting, because how do you know you've actually got a good therapy? You're actually getting good therapy. I mean,
You don't.
So the thing is, let's face it, we are totally conditioned to rely on a governmental system or a ideological system based on someone else's thoughts.
You don't, but there is something on your side, and that is that when I say good therapy, it doesn't always have to depend on the therapist. It depends on the patient, you. So what they found out is successive therapy also depends on how much you like and respect your therapist. And to summarize it, what a lot of research has shown is that how do you process your traumas? What is processing? It means come to understand so that you can file them away in your brain. And often it's talking about it, it's thinking about it, it's writing about it. Because one of the problems, of course, with misunderstandings, with things that upset you or cause trauma, is the brain does anything to avoid or reduce anxiety. So if there's an unpleasant feeling about something, you will automatically, subconsciously suppress it, and you'll never process it. But what happens there is you get left with this uncomfortable sensation. And what discomfort is stress. And that raises cortisol.
Well, actually, let me give you an example. That something happened to me recently with Emma.
Your wife?
Yes, my wife. So, she's got a problem with being on time. All right? Like a lot of people, Theo. They got a problem being on time.
Mm-hmm.
All right? So, she's genuinely late for certain things. Now, I'm someone who's very, very punctual. All right, and in fact, I actually get there early, and I get there early because I realise that when I'm late, the later I am, the more stressed I become. That stress causes a spike in cortisol. That cortisol then makes me unhappy, it makes me stressed, it makes me anxious, and then my behaviour is I snap at the person who's made me late. In this case, probably my wife. Whereas she's probably planned her whole journey to a T by whatever man, and she's probably planned an hour beforehand, whereas I'm probably quite a spontaneous person, but I know that thereabouts I've got to be half an hour early, not to allow for any variables.
But I think that's you, because most people with ADHD are late, but you've responded by being overly early because it's that important to you.
And it could be, well, it could be, because that's also a level of conditioning. It's conditioning in the school, it's conditioning in the army, it's conditioning when you sit down at the dinner table, and there's a level of conditioning and all that sort of stuff as well, though.
Well, the sense of lack of control that you feel is sublimated slightly by compensating by being early and on time.
That's right, because you're not in control. Because if someone's late, you're not in control of time anymore.
That's it. But you try and increase your sense of control by turning up on time, which then makes you doubly furious if someone else is not on time, because you've had to go to that much more effort to be on time, right, to feel in control.
Because I don't want to reach the point where I'm actually stressed of rushing to get late somewhere, because then I'm not thinking straight.
Mm.
So the thing is, your emotions go higher when you're late because you're more emotional, and therefore you can't think rationally.
Yes.
And then because you're more emotional, then you're more susceptible to more aggressive emotions, I suppose.
Of course, because your impulse control is lower, and
that's right.
Your frustration index is also lower.
But just that one act of being late has created a domino effect to lead to my behaviour later on. If you actually break it down into, okay, I'm now stressed, I'm now annoyed, this is my behaviour, this is my response. And then you think, actually, I'm a really bad person. The thing is, when I explain that to my wife, she goes, actually, it's actually come, and rationally, and you don't do it at the time because it's not beneficial. And you say, well, actually, you did this. Well, right, when you're late, and this is the effect that it causes me. And when she actually understands that, she now is making more of a conscious effort to be on time.
That's good.
But it's there's other things as well. That's not the only thing, but you can't address these issues until you actually understand them, and people don't always understand the reason. Because have you ever asked yourself, actually, why do I get upset for her being late? Oh, because I just don't like lateness. Well, no. That's the cause of it.
Yeah, that's the final result, isn't it? But once we figure out that you're putting extra effort in to being early, not even on time, but early, which then gives you back a sense of control in the topsy-turvy ADHD world you live in, it's doubly frustrating, quadruply frustrating if someone else is late, because that your fragile hold of sense of control then gets dispersed and goes up in smoke again.
And if you don't have control, we get
stressed.
It's a difficult one, and I feel sorry for kids in school. I don't even know that's the best. I mean, actually, it's all changed as well, though. They're teaching them in smaller segments, 10-minute segments at one stage, because the attention span that we actually had probably 100, 150 years ago is not anywhere near that now.
Well, it's the instant gratification society, isn't it?
And the thing is, it's causing a huge impact on everybody's behaviour.
But worse, as I said, hugely since computers, tablets, mobile phones, social media, YouTube with all its shorts, with all so YouTube clips, shorts, TikTok shorts, they actually should be banned. They should be outlawed. It is a form of psychological abuse and warfare.
TikTok was actually created by Chinese neuroscientists, apparently.
And
actually, TikTok is actually banned in India.
It is banned, and quite rightly so. In fact, depression used to be the 5th commonest cause of illness and death 20 to 25 years ago. It has now become the commonest. And in addition to a society that doesn't suit us humans, is the rise of social media and these constant dopamine hits, which then, as we explained, drops your serotonin, makes you depressed. And not just that, but of course it's the comparison to others, and it's the sense of inadequacy where you think everyone else is living in a ideal, perfect world, whereas actually no, they're just as miserable as you are. They're just pretending.
But it's interesting though. We've become more miserable, and the thing is, that's I mean, going into a political direction for a second, we're heading towards globalization, all right? And if you actually look back, we all lived in tribes. Yeah, we were strong as a tribe. We were strong as a community, at one point. And over time, we've been divided. We've been divided from our family. We've gone from the tribe to the extended family, from the extended family to the nuclear family. And now we're even looking at single parenthood
So let's hold that sort of thought for a second, because that is a completely different subject. However, it is also...
No, it's not. I'll tell you why. Let me finish and then I'll come back to it. So what's happened is that if we are pack animals, we are now being separated from our pack and learn to be like individuals. And we're operating as individuals all the time. We're not thinking in terms of what's best for my tribe or what's best for my family or what's best for this. It's what's best for me, because we're all being separated. We're moving abroad. We're moving to London to get a job from whatever it is. We are gradually being separated, and that actually impacts your behaviour, particularly when you've actually been brought up in a more secure manner. So now you're not secure anymore, because now you're more stressed as a whole, because you're having to do it alone as opposed to do it as part of the...
But focusing on our subject matter, so you're right. In terms of social media, there are two things going on. There is the obsession with yourself, which of course then makes you less liable to be tribal. And of course, if kids get in early on, they don't learn to socialize properly. And then there is also the mass narrative. In other words, because of course social media is global, so therefore there's always the mass narrative going on, which demands compliance. So most people will comply with the mass narrative because that's how we are hardwired. We are hardwired to be influenced and comply with rules from seniors, superiors, with a mass opinion and narrative. Multiple experiments have shown that. And again, for instance, in the summer, I was in this beautiful Greek island, and we were at a dinner party, and I went in to check on the kids halfway through dinner, and you know what they were doing? No. All 6 kids were sitting on tablets and mobile phones instead of playing with each other. I mean, shocking, absolutely shocking.
That's what I mean. That we've been told to operate. We've been conditioned. I feel we've been conditioned to operate alone because as a group, people who are part of the group are harder to control.
Yeah, but we're going on to a different topic.
I know, but
we need to be disciplined. I know because ADHD tends to drive you away. But
it does, yes.
Because that is a different thing altogether. And of course, we will talk about that another time. But the key thing, therefore, is therefore our self-esteem is being attacked all the time by comparison to the ideal on social media and the pressure. And then we're being made to feel lower in mood and depressed and helpless, without realizing, of course, that it's social media that's doing it to us again. And remember, the more pleasure you seek, the less happy you are. So you keep on doing it, seeking more and more and more. And that's how addicts act. Cocaine addicts, alcoholics. You need a much bigger hit to get the same effect.
The thing is, let me ask you a question, because society looks at alcoholics and drug addicts and things like that. They see them like losers in some ways. We dismiss them, as a problem. They have a problem. So do you not feel that sometimes that they're actually self-medicating?
Well, could be. But you see, again, that's why.
I'm not saying it's the right medication, because the thing is, it's not. Some people are overdoing it.
That's why they call self-medication, because self-medication is usually not correct. But that's part of the problem of living in a meritocracy. So the thing with a meritocracy is that people are seen to be. They don't actually take responsibility, but they're seen to be responsible for their level of success. So, for instance, if someone is incredibly successful, we admire them and laud them, and have them as a role model, and have them influence us in any way that they wish, no matter what modality of success it is, whether it's Bono or whether it's Djokovic or whether it's a politician or whether it's a film actor. Or if they don't do well, then they're also seen to be responsible, and we call them a loser. So the society is full of winners and losers and the mass in between.
But it's interesting,
without realising that most of it is luck.
Yeah, yes, but it's interesting because we don't actually sort of say, how do we really define success? Because the thing is, we're defining success by what the system is saying, or what society is saying, that we need to go and work 68 hours a week.
So that's another huge topic again.
Let's
go back to the kids with ADHD. So and what's interesting, of course, is that if you're a person with ADHD and you're on social media, that's going to make your ADHD infinitely worse. And in fact, one of my patients recently, he said, I stopped social media for 7 days now, 6-7 days. And I feel much better. I feel calmer. And in fact, the same with my son. I just stopped him using YouTube. And we had him on YouTube, and then we put him on YouTube Kids, and then I stopped it altogether because the algorithm on YouTube is merciless. It is designed to shock you, because shock is a greater stimulation than simply something good and nice and interesting. And that's why fake news travels 6 times quicker in social media than the real news. So social media is evil and should be banned in almost every single respect. And one of the things I tell patients, going back to self-esteem, is no parent wants their kid to be on medication, do they? Why should they? You want your kid to be healthy and thriving and happy. But I tell parents, look, self-esteem is one of the most important factors in success in life. Do you want your child to grow up being given an expectation that they're going to do badly, that they're going to fail, that they are different in a bad way? Or do you want them to develop normally and build up their self-esteem and have success experiences?
You've got to consider there's a lot of other factors, particularly when we feed our kids from a young age. I mean, particularly when we used to give them cereal and things like this. You've got to consider the hormone, all the diet and all the stuff that they eat, and particularly all the processed stuff, and even the water has probably got estrogen and chemicals in it to keep it clean, so you can drink it from the tap.
That's been well researched. Yep.
Yeah, these will all cause hormonal imbalances.
Not just that, but chemicals. Which
affects a child's production or
productivity, concentration.
It affects all these things, and we ignore that. You know, it's easy to actually give them a sugar spike because they want sweets.
That's the thing. So artificial colorings and E-numbers are very bad for ADHD, and you're right. Sugar also makes them go over the top hyper. So if an average child goes over the top hyper with sugar, an ADHD child will just go into orbit. So you're absolutely correct. So the first thing to do is, depending on the degree of ADHD, you don't immediately go for medication. You look at what else is going on. You look at, can I improve the diet? Can I help them learn to concentrate? Because concentration is a habit. If you never develop it, then it's going to be hard to concentrate.
Give them more exercise, because if you're talking about all these kids being on tablets and mobile phones and everything, they're sitting down. The only reward is what's on their screen.
That's right.
They don't get to appreciate and the thing is, again, because they're not getting into the habit of exercising and moving around and things like this, they're not, again, exercise. That should be enough to give you dopamine spikes that you're not getting.
But then the thing is, you can't carry on doing it. That's the problem. So depending on the degree of your ADHD, yes, you're right. So at school, ADHD kids are given play breaks. But, there's only a certain amount of play breaks you can take whilst remaining a functional member of the class. Now, we did mention, and it is unbelievably important, that self-awareness and understanding that gives you is the main route to clarity of mind. So what is clarity of mind? It means that you're able to see things as they are without being influenced by misunderstandings and traumas from the past, so that you can make the best decisions for yourself and others. And very few people have that, because almost everything we do is emotional, 98%. Therefore, by definition, almost nothing we do is actually good for us, because an emotional decision is very unlikely to be good for us. So therefore, research has shown that even writing about difficulties, not traumas, but just difficulties that you've gone through in your life, will lead to you being healthier mentally and physically. Your ECG, your blood pressure will be better, and cognitively, you'll do better at school or university. So self-journaling is very good for you. Talking it through with a therapist, again, it's someone who lets you talk and that you enjoy talking with, is essential. And if you have so severe trauma that you can't do it, it's too painful, then you need to have formal trauma therapy. And what's really interesting is, I was wondering, is there a mechanism by which our DNA can be damaged? And of course, stress raises cortisol. And one of the ways that our DNA is affected is methylation. So methylation is where you stick methyl groups onto your DNA, and that affects your gene expression. And that's epigenetics. In other words, your genes aren't changed, but your expression is, and that can be transferred from one generation to the next. They did a study with pregnant women. So pregnant women who go through trauma, they will pass epigenetic changes via methylation on their chromosomes to their offspring.
In fact, actually, probably I think the best example as a metaphor I actually saw once, and I read it, was, imagine you've got a paragraph of written words, and what the epigenetics does is actually doesn't change the DNA, which is all the words, but what it does change is you're now changing the full stops and the commas in different places, so it reads differently.
Yes.
Even though the DNA is the same, what it does is it reads, it changes the tone of your behaviour, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and make no mistake, I'm going to be absolutely clear, methylation is major, because your gene expression is everything. It doesn't matter if you've got great genes if you're not expressing them. And another example, for instance, what they found is rats who were given a cocaine addiction had that addictive behavior abolished by demethylation of their DNA. Demethylation. So therefore, methylation has vast effects, global effects on our behavior and our health. And behavior, for instance, warlike nations. Yeah, there are warlike nations because epigenetically they have behaved in that way. Spartans, for instance.
So let me ask.
We need to wrap up now.
So let me ask you this. Oh, sorry, I lost my trail of thought. Actually, oh no, it's actually so. If you want, so for example, let's say as a family you wanted to have a child.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's almost worth taking them away for a year, going away for a year and living a very clean life, no alcohol, no cigarettes, get your body in shape and everything before you even think about having a kid, which will have an impact on how your child's going to come out. Because, I mean, let's face it, someone who's overweight, who has a child, that child's going to actually inherit a lot of fatty cells and things like that, which makes it harder for them to lose weight.
Yes.
Later on, because that's the physical. The physical hormones and chemicals and whatever you got in your system, you're passing on to your child.
Which is why you shouldn't, take drugs or drink alcohol whilst you're pregnant. And ideally, as you say,
for a year beforehand.
Give yourself free time before as well.
Give yourself a year beforehand to actually sort of clean up your body. If you want to be really serious about having a healthy kid, in some ways, just a thought. Anyway. Look, we could go into so many different topics now, guys, but thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we'll expand on this and maybe go in another direction later on. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.